Good evening. This is another edition of Resource PNG. Tonight we take a look at how the second largest cash crop in PNG, coffee, has fared in years past to present. We also take a look at the lessons arising from laws surrounding small agriculture and business leases, SABLs. But first we delve into the coffee issue with this next report on the World Coffee Outlook and get a first-hand perspective from international coffee expert Mick Wheeler. Coffee production in Papua New Guinea accounts for approximately 1% of world production. On the global scale, production and consumption over the last 15 years has been marked by both deficits and surpluses. And in terms of production, Robusta coffee is now taking a much bigger percentage of the world's production of Arabica coffee, as there's a stable demand for Robusta. There's also been a shift in power in terms of stocks where consuming countries are now holding more stocks than producing countries. This is according to Mick Wheeler, an international expert in the coffee industry. Mr. Wheeler had worked in the country for 37 years, first as an agriculture economist and then as Chief Agriculture Economist of the Department of Primary Industries. He now sits on a number of coffee advisory boards in Europe. Mr. Wheeler was a guest at a lunch hour seminar hosted by the Institute of National Affairs, INA, in Port Moresby in May 2014.
Supply and demand, the darker one is the production, the lighter blue is the consumption. And as you can see, we've had some years when we've had surpluses, some years when we've had deficits. But at the moment, in 2013, basically supply and demand were well matched. We actually had a balance between world supply and demand. Next thing. This shows you production by type, and this is really important because I've divided between Arabica and Robusta. And if you look at the darker one, which is the Arabica, the bottom bit there, not too bad there over the last, again, 15, 16 years. But what is interesting is the increase in Robusta production. Now, Robusta production is a lower quality production than Arabica, but as you can see, the proportion of the world's total production of coffee, Robusta is now taking a much bigger percentage of world production of Arabica. Just giving you a very quick, brief rundown on what's going on with world production. As you can see, Papua New Guinea produces about 1%, the rest of the world 9%, but the biggest one is Brazil at 34%. Very interesting is Vietnam at 19%. That's about 29 million bags of coffee in 2013. And that's obviously going to be significant because they've gone from literally nothing in the early 1980s to 29 million bags in 30 odd years. Fantastic growth. Everybody, Paul mentioned the fact that I went to work with Vietnam in the late 1980s, and before I went to Vietnam, I asked around, I said, well, how much coffee is Vietnam producing? And it was 40,000 bags, maybe 50,000 bags. So I was thinking, okay, I'm going to go to a really small industry. So I go there, my first time, and when I get back, I say to everybody, you lot don't know what you're talking about. I reckon they're producing at least 1 million bags now. And by the turn of the century, they're going to be producing 5 million bags. And everybody laughed at me. Everyone thought I was stupid, didn't know what I was talking about. They all called me long. They said, oh, no, you don't. And as I say to them now, I did get it wrong, didn't I? I said, they didn't produce 5 million bags by year 2000. It was 15 million bags they were producing by 2000, and the world accepted the fact that I was right. Next slide, please. This is what I thought was up earlier. There we go. I wanted to show you the difference between services and things. As you can see, in the late 1990s to 2000, we had a lot of big surpluses. And those big surpluses forced prices way down. So in the early part of the turn of the century, from 2002 to 2006, we had extremely low prices, reflecting the fact we had this huge surplus of coffee overhanging the market. And it was only really by the time we got to 2007, which was a big deficit, that prices really started to improve again. We got back into, and you will recall, prices on New York in that period there were below 50 cents per pound. And it was a really critical time for every world producer was facing problems. as you can see, we had a number of years of deficit, and then in 2012 we had a small surplus. And everyone thought, well, okay, and then in 2013, as I say, we're in balance again. And that's, now, next slide, please. Big thing is, well, so what happens to global stocks? Now this is, if you look at the far line, one at the back of it, the dark blue one, that gives you total of stocks, and it gives you the idea. When we have a deficit, any deficit is made up from stocks. So any stocks we've had it with a deficit, we draw down stocks. If we have a surplus, it adds to stocks. And the big issue here is, where are those stocks held? So if you look at the light blue, that shows you producing countries. That's when stocks were held in producing countries. So actually what we see is that, again, in 2002, 2003, when we had this huge oversupply in the market, producing countries were carrying quite large stocks. So they were carrying very large stocks. But as you can see, as we got down through to 2007, when prices started to improve again, producer stocks were declining. What's actually really interesting in the last 5 years is look at the stocks held in consuming countries, which is the green one there. It was fairly constant for the first sort of 10 years, and then it started to increase. And last year, there was as much stock held in consuming countries as there is in producing countries. Now this is important, because if a stock's held in the consuming country, it means it's immediately available for consumption. If it's held in a producing country, it means it's got to be shipped. And then you also got to have the producing country agree to release those stocks. So what we've seen is it's been a shift in power to a certain extent to consumers. The more stocks they hold, the more they don't need to necessarily panic buy. So this is very, very important. This is what's actually happened to prices. Now, the composite is the average between the Arabica and the Robusta price of the world market. But as you can see with Robustas hasn't shown the same sort of volatility that Arabica shows. The top line is the Arabic one. There you can see huge volatility, especially it's not during the low price period, of course, 2002 to 2007. Low prices, quite stable, not that much volatility. Once we get into situations where people are worried about supply and demand, and it primarily relates to Arabica, because as I showed you before, the amount of Robusta on the world market has been increasing, it's been fairly stable. So what we've seen is fairly stable demand for Robusta, and it's in the Arabica that we tend to see more volatility in the market. And so this graph shows that particularly well.
Coffee production in Papua New Guinea from 2008 to 2013 had varied, attributed to a number of factors. Mick Wheeler stated that this clearly shows that leading producers of coffee dictate the market a great deal. The value of coffee exports to PNG is what drives the economy of the country. Thus, when the prices are high, people benefit a great deal as they tend to have cash in their pockets, but suffer when coffee prices fall. More of this report after the break. Welcome back. Coffee production in PNG accounts for approximately 1% of world production. Between the years 2008 and 2013, coffee production had varied due to a number of factors. In this next segment, we look at how coffee really drives the internal economy. A reason why coffee is seen to really drive the internal economy is that many people are engaged directly in coffee farming, apart from other well-known cash crops such as oil palm, cocoa and copra. Only when we disaggregate the value of coffee exports as a percentage of all exports from PNG, then we can appreciate the benefit that coffee generates for coffee farmers and others in the internal economy value chain.
Let's have a look at the value of coffee exports to Papua New Guinea, and this is in terms of millions of US dollars. And again, as you can see, in 2010 and 11, and in also 2011-12, we got over almost $300 million from coffee. Quite significant amounts of money. However, let's look at the value of coffee exports as a percentage of all exports from Papua New Guinea. And now we see that actually we're quite small. Even in 2011, we only accounted for just over 5% of total exports from Papua New Guinea. And this in a way reflects, if you like, the way the politicians look at coffee, because they look at that and they realise that everything else is more valuable than coffee. Except what this graph does not show is how many people are dependent upon coffee. This is the important. So when we talk about coffee, we talk about coffee prices, we estimate that something like 50% of the households derive all or part of their income from coffee. It's this that's really the impact. This is, and I say to politicians, and I say to everybody, coffee is what drives the internal economy. This is what the internal economy depends upon. When prices are good, we see boom times in the internal economy. Everything else is effectively external stimuluses. Coffee is the one thing that gives you an internal stimulus to the internal economy. So it's important. Even though it might only be a small percentage of the overall, it's still very, very important.
The volatility in price of coffee is very much dictated by Brazil's coffee production. When Brazil's coffee production declines, then PNG farmers benefit from higher prices due to the deficit supply to the market. But with the increasing world demand for coffee, producing countries need to meet this demand. PNG could benefit from this by increasing production, which remains to be a challenge. According to Mick Wheeler, the world demand for coffee continues to increase every year. In year 2014 to 2015, world demand is estimated at around 148 million bags. And world production in 2014 to 2015 without Brazil is estimated at 98.5 million bags. So just to be in the balance, the world needs Brazil to produce at least 49.5 million bags.
World demand's been one of the real constants over the last 20 years. Every year, world demand has increased by 2 million bags per year, roughly. One year might be 1.5, next year it might be 2.5, but over the last 20 years, we've seen 40 million bags being added to world consumption, and that's been almost constant. It hasn't changed, it's almost straight line, and that's right. Production has moved around a bit, but consumption has stayed roughly very, very constant. Now, if we look at world production without Brazil, so we take Brazil right out of the equation altogether, we know that the rest of the world is going to produce about 98.5 million bags. So if we want to balance supply and demand, then Brazil, the world needs Brazil to produce 49.5 million bags.
We'll be back with more when we return. You're with Resource PNG. According to international coffee expert Mick Wheeler, the demand for coffee continues to increase every year. In 2014 to 2015, the world demand estimated at around 148 million bags. Continuing with our report on coffee production, we look at why quality plays such an important role in the supply and demand equation. With the balance in supply and demand for coffee, another important issue that comes into the equation is quality. Furthermore, according to forecast, if Brazil produces only 40 million bags of coffee, the price will be much higher, averaging around $3 per pound. Or if it's 57 million bags, then prices will quickly retreat to average somewhere below $1.20 per pound. This clearly shows that leading producers of coffee dictate the market a great deal. And this is what Mick Wheeler has to say.
And even if it produces 49.5 million bags, it means we're in balance. The question is then, what's the quality of that coffee that's being produced? Is it good quality or bad quality? And that's what we'll see then is going to determine the price. If it's really good quality, which it shouldn't be, I can't say it's not going to be, but it shouldn't be because of the problems the coffee's gone through. It should be fairly poor quality. But if it's good quality, then prices will be lower. If it's very poor quality, then the good quality coffee will obviously go for a much higher price. Next time, please. Right, so if everybody's wrong and it actually is 40 million bags, then I would say to you the prices are going to average over $3 a pound. We're going to see a real spike in prices in August and September. We're going to see really high prices coming around if it's 40 million bags. So if we go right to the lowest forecast, that's where we will be. However, if it's 57 million bags or anywhere close, then prices are going to drop to 120. So, and if it's somewhere in between, who really knows? But I would say if it's round about 48 to 50 million bags, then we should average round about the $1.50 to $2 in that region. That's where we should be. And let's be honest, in Papua New Guinea, any price over $1.50 is a good price for our products. So everyone will be happy with that price. And because, as I explained earlier on, next year's crop is going to be affected because the vegetative growth hasn't taken place. And if it hasn't taken place now, it will not take place in the next 6 months while they're harvesting. And it'll be the flowering is only on the new wood. You won't be growing new wood now until next year. We know next year's crop is going to be affected. So we know that next year's also prices are going to be good next year. So we have this 2-year window of really good prices. They should be really good. Now, I'd also say to you, we also know that's going to stimulate demand, production in other countries. So we will have lower prices, I don't know when, but 3, 4, 5, 6 years time, we're going to go back into a low price period. And that's the story. So although we're going to have a short period of really good prices, we will have low prices at some stage in the future. So this is not a complete turnaround, it's just a temporary situation, and this happens all the time in coffee. Coffee is known for short periods of high prices followed by long periods of low prices. And this is because it takes 3 to 5 years for a coffee tree to come into production. So people plant when prices are high. By the time it comes into production, coffee prices are low, and we've got this because everybody's increased production.
In Western Europe, the consumption of coffee has changed a great deal. The consumption of coffee is now based on the value perception of coffee. Thus, the future coffee market for PNG and the rest of the world continues to look relatively bright, with strong growth of specialty coffee markets in Europe.
It is important to realise that at least a quarter, more than a quarter of consumption of coffee in Europe is now consumed out of home. And that has changed quite significantly over the last 30 or 40 years, maybe not so much over 10 years. And I always give, and I've given it to many times, Chuck is now getting fed up with hearing it, but there is a change taking place, not only in Europe, but also around the world. And this is in value perception of coffee. When I ask my mother, I say to her, what is the price of coffee? And because we're in the UK, she'll say, oh, about £3 a packet down the supermarket. Then I say to my son, what's the price of coffee? And he says, oh, about £3 a cup. Now can you see there's a difference? He looks at coffee as being out of home. He drinks coffee from a coffee shop. So he thinks in terms of what's the price per cup. My mother's generation thinks in terms of price per pound or whatever they were going to buy. And this is a value perception change that we're seeing. We're seeing the younger generation, where, let's face it, future consumption demands, they look at coffee now in terms of per cup.
But with this window of opportunity for PNG, Mick Wheeler clearly articulates that the future for PNG coffee is meeting specialty market standards, which places a huge emphasis on quality. We'll be back with more right after these short messages. Thanks for staying with us. Specialty market standards will greatly determine the quality of world coffee production. In this next segment, international coffee expert Mick Wheeler speaks of the 2 requirements that meet these specialty market standards. Furthermore, Mr. Wheeler outlined 2 requirements that the specialty market is looking for, and these includes the physical characteristics of coffee and the story behind the coffee, which simply refers to the consumer's perception of where the coffee comes from.
Quality is dependent on 2 factors. Quality is dependent, first of all, on the physical characteristics of the coffee, and the second is the story behind the coffee. Because I challenge you. You go back in your life and think, when was the best cup of coffee I ever drank? When was the best cup of coffee? When did I taste the best cup of coffee? And I bet you it was when you were first going out with one of your loved ones. You were looking at there in their eyes, and you're in a coffee shop, and you're more thinking about them than you are the coffee. You're thinking, this is perfect, this is nice. Oh, this is a good cup of coffee. Oh, is she beautiful? Is he lovely? Yeah. So your mind is looking at, you're combining the situation with the coffee that you're drinking. And it is all about perception. At the end of the day, this is what I'm trying to say. Coffee quality is very subjective. It's what you like. It's not what I like. I can tell you whether the coffee is good or bad. I can say this one's got off taste and this one's bad. But it's what you like that makes it. But people come to me and say, what's the best coffee in the world? Okay, well, apart from Papua New Guinea, it's the one you like the best. That's really where it all comes from. And it really is important that people understand this. Those perceptions are important. So, quality, so the exporters have been able to develop new markets for us in America, which is good, and they're selling a lot of our wine grades now and our better quality coffees to America. And we're not selling so much of our better quality coffees or our wine grades to Europe anymore. But if you look at this graph, which I'm now talking about single serve, that now gives us a great opportunity. Because with single serve, and I talked to my son about this, and I talked to younger age, people are more experimental. They don't mind tasting one cup of coffee from a strange, exotic location. They want to experiment. They want to taste coffees from all over the world. If you bought one big packet of Papua New Guinea coffee, you're stuck with that for the next week. In a shop, you go in there, you get one cup. If you didn't like it, okay, next day you'll try Ethiopian, you might try Brazilian, or you might try. But the point is, all of the people who are getting into this are trying to differentiate their products from mainstream, and they're doing it by using single origin and different, i.e. organic, certified, whatever. So it gives the story behind the company. Now this gives us great opportunity. We are an exotic location. We have some fantastic stories. We have fantastic images. We have some fantastic shade grown, bird friendly, Mudman coffee, you name it, whatever you like to call it. We have all of these stories, and that gives perception to the coffee. So we have all of these things that we can combine into this. Roasters, and I brought the team of roasters from Europe here, and this is what they were looking for. They're looking for unusual, exotic coffees that they can offer their customers. But they want good quality. And so when I said 50% of it is physical quality, you can't ignore physical quality. Physical quality is important. If the coffee tastes lousy, it tastes lousy. No matter how good your story is, if it's lousy coffee, it's lousy coffee. People will reject it. And so it's important that we realise good quality coffee. This gives us a unique opportunity. We're in a unique opportunity situation where we can basically embrace these new trends, get involved in it, trying to differentiate our coffees from everybody else's, get out there, do a little bit of promotion, do a little bit of actually marketing of the coffee. This is where the future lies. And this is what I've been trying to say to everybody. There are some great opportunities. Prices are going to be good. We have a great opportunity to invest now in our industry. This investment is taking place. As you know, the CIC has got a big program on at the moment, funded by the World Bank, and we are going to be moving forward. But we've got to have all of the components in place for us to move forward, and that's the important.
Mr. Wheeler leaves a challenge for PNG, which is providing more innovative techniques to attract young people into coffee farming in order to sustain the coffee industry. This means that the coffee industry has to be rejuvenated by appropriated government interventions. Coupled with this is the need to produce quality coffee that can be marketable in the growing specialty market of Europe. According to Mr. Wheeler, if this is done right, then everybody in the coffee market value chain will benefit. Resource PNG continues when we come back. You're watching Resource PNG. A number of issues have arisen surrounding the Small Agriculture and Business Leases, SABLs, particularly in light of landowner benefits. We now take a look at this report on lessons arising from SABLs. The National Research Institute this month released a draft report on Special Agriculture and Business Leases, SABL. The paper is authored by Professor John Luluaki, who is the Executive Dean of the School of Law at the University of Papua New Guinea. This report discusses a number of issues relating to Special Agriculture and Business Leases, SABLs, especially regarding the legislative and administrative framework within which they operate and the related challenges, and how the National Court has responded to the issue of landowners' consent as a precondition to the granting of SABLs. Where relevant, these issues are discussed against the backdrop of the findings and recommendation of the Commission of Inquiry into SABLs with a view to providing possible policy options or direction in transacting with or otherwise dealing with customary land, so the principal social and economic imperatives and objectives of SABLs are to the greater benefit of SABL landowners and developers. In an overview of the report, this is what Dr. Thomas Webster, Director of NRI, had to say.
The development of land has become very critical and important in our economic development and social development going forward. The government and many of in the public and private sectors, we all recognize that there is a growing need to develop our land in a manner that benefits us all. And so the government, in recognizing the problem, and in the past when we had tried to, or the government and authorities have tried to use customary land and development of customary land going beyond the alienated land, it led to many problems, and we had the student strikes, and the manner in which land was supposed to be alienated. Many people felt that they didn't want to permanently alienate that land and so on. And so because of these problems, the government invited NRI and some other government institutions to review the land policy and also to say in what mechanisms or what ways can we develop land, both alienated and customary land. And so we had a land development summit in 2005 in Leh. And that set the agenda and the stage for looking and exploring ways in which we can release land for development. And while those discussions were going on and looking at a number of ways to access land for development, and the main recommendations from that summit, if I can just put it into three main recommendations, was one, that the public realized that we want to access and release land for development. Customary landowners wanted to release land for development, but they're not happy with the way the state was administrating the current land, alienated land. And they said, we want to see improvements in land administration. The second point was on the development of land dispute mechanisms to deal with the many disputes that were emerging. And I said, if we want to release land, then there are disputes that are emerging, and so we want a credible dispute system that will deal with the disputes that are emerging. And the third is, what mechanisms can we bring customary land into development? A mechanism that will allow land to be released, but we do not want to release the land permanently. We want to have it in the custody of our landowners and forever. And so we now started to discuss and look at ways to undertake how can we improve land administration, what sort of land dispute mechanisms and mechanisms to release customary land. And under the third area, while the discussions were being held, many people now started to look at ways to release land, and the Special Agriculture Business Leases was one mechanism through which customary land could be accessed for development that existed. And so the government and some officers started to use this mechanism to release land. It is an appropriate way, but it is not the best way in our analysis. And so the Land Task Force report that the Government Commission following the Leh Summit has recommended for a mechanism that simple amendments to the Land Registration Act and the Incorporated Land Group Act that allows for customary land to be registered to a group that will then release the land for development, and that land will forever remain in the custody of those ILGs. It's a better mechanism and an improved mechanism. But the SABL, I guess the pressure was on, and these new legislations were taking time to evolve, and they were eventually passed by Parliament in 2009. But before that, you know, people were starting to put pressure, and so the SABL leases were being created and given to developers. And so it was, you know, leading to a stage where land was being released on an unprecedented level, both in urban areas as well as forests, large areas of forest. And so following the public outcry, the government established a commission of inquiry into the special agriculture business leases. And so the the commission of inquiry sat and and made the recommendations to government. And the government has now appointed, and from what we hear, has accepted a report, but has appointed a ministerial committee to now take carriage of the recommendations, and also to now see what to do about the recommendations. So that's a background, and that's where we are. And I know many people out in the wider community want to see what has happened to the SABL, the COI report, and what's going to come out of it, and what the government is going to do in order to either to act on the recommendations or what is going to happen. And so we are all interested to see what's going to happen and what the outcome is. And we from the National Research Institute, we have also taken an interest. And we have written to the minister responsible, the Minister for Forests, who's the chair of the ministerial committee, pointing out that we are also concerned. We want to see some credible process through which we can look at the SABLs, look at the COI report, and work on and assist in a way that will allow for some of the SABLs which have developed and they're good developments, sound developments. We can try and help to convert those SABLs to the new law. One of the weaknesses about the SABL is after 99 years or after 45 years of lease, that land is now coming back to customary landowners. That's the weakness with that. If it comes back after the lease, who will it end up with? On what basis? And then that's the problem with this SABL, the main problem we see with this SABL. So what we're saying is that the SABL should now be converted under the new laws so that some of the good developments, so that we can capture it and in a proper way, so that when it reverts back to customary landowners, when the lease expires, there's a mechanism that will deal with that. And so we think that the COI report is sound, but the government needs to move quickly to act on it so that then there are some clear sort of ways that we can process it. The second problem that then arise, and from what I see as a problem with the way the government has handled the COI report, is that the COI report has now gone back to ministers of departments who were responsible for the administration process in the first place. And that's a weakness in itself, that there are vested interests in the ministerial group and the heads of departments who also muddled up the process, and that led to the COI, and now they have been told to fix the problem. And whether they will fix the problem in the right way or not is a question, and we wait to see. And so we would like to see an independent group headed by probably the Chief Secretary and advised by the the state solicitors to look at the way to process those COI recommendations rather than leaving it to the ministerial committee. But that's sort of putting the background. I think the important thing that we are here today is to hear about the SABL cases. And some cases we've heard in the media that the courts have thrown out the recommendations, but we want to know why those cases have been thrown out and on what basis and so on.
Resource PNG continues when we return. Welcome back to Resource PNG. Small agriculture and business leases are seen as a vehicle for freeing up customary land for economic development. But the principal drivers for SABLs have also been seen as the reasons for its failure. According to Professor John Luluwaki, those interested in the SABLs acknowledge its utility as a vehicle for freeing up customary land for economic development. However, despite the very clear economic justifications underlying the concepts of SABLs, the policy, administrative and legislative framework as the principal drivers have been the reasons for its failure.
The purpose for SABLs is to allow landowners, customary landowners, to use their land for developing their own social and economic well-being. It was to free up customary land which can then be utilized for commercial purposes, for economic development by landowners, customary landowners. So the relationship between customary landowners and development is natural. Without this link, SABLs would be almost redundant. The purpose for SABLs was to free up customary land for the purpose of developing the social and economic well-being of the landowners. Discourse on this matter has informed us that an estimated 5.2 million hectares of customary land has been subjected to SABLs since the early 1980s, and they involve over 400 SABLs. Of the 400 SABLs, 5.2 million hectares, that is massive, so much land, and most of it involves forestry. Most of it involves forestry, the very point of so much contention and grievance in this country. The major grievances are that it has failed to deliver the outcome.
The report clearly articulates that there are many challenges confronting SABLs. As identified, there are 3 areas of shortcomings that weaken the SABL concept, which include the legislative framework, the absence of an administrative framework or system supported by a legislative framework, and the failure with proper processes. Consequently, as per the report findings, the SABL system provides for fraudulent transactions.
SABLs have failed to deliver the economic outcomes promised by the SABL facility. And the reasons are bracketed: corruption, complicity, conspiracy, disguise. And what do I mean by disguise? That instead of using SABLs for purposes for which they were established, they were disguised to do something else. For example, to rape our forests. And also because there was, in many of these cases, there was no consultation with land-owning groups, customary land-owning groups. There was no consent. Or if there was consent, it was inappropriately obtained or fraudulently obtained. So the result, the outcome of all this is a failure in the SABL program because they cheated and robbed customary landowners of the opportunity promised by the SABL facility. The setting up or the establishment of the Commission of Inquiry into SABLs confirms the overpowering effect of the grievances. The Commission of Inquiry into SABLs confirms that there were major difficulties and grievances being generated by the corruptive way the SABL facility was managed. The managers of the SABLs became rich, sometimes even overnight, and the landowners remained poor or continued to live along poverty lines. So the SABL So that the Commission of Inquiry into SABLs confirms the fact that there were serious problems in the management and the benefit system of SABLs.
Furthermore, the report provides for a win-win process whereby the landowners own the land and lease or enter into development agreements on portions of interest for development. In return, the developer has access to land with secure titles. More broadly, this legal framework provides the basis upon which the government can successfully implement its policies onto small to medium enterprises, housing, job creation, and income opportunities for Papua New Guineans with greater sustainability prospects. Both the inquiry and the courts have identified the same serious deficiency, the weak legal and administrative framework, and the abuse of due processes.
There are two things amongst Papua New Guineans. There are two things that are so jealously guarded and passionately progressed. That's family and land. No two other things. Those are the most uppermost matters that are so close to the hearts of Papua New Guineans. They are very, very jealously guarded. Land and family. So this is much more important than we think it is, the SABL matter.
Freeing up land for economic development is intrinsic to growth, but striking a balance somewhere to ensure that owners of the land also reap maximum benefits from the use of their land is equally important. Since land is at the heart of the people of PNG, it is important that their interests are protected. That ends this edition of Resource PNG. If you have any comments or queries, do email us on this address, resourcepng@mtv.com.pg. Or to find out more, check MTV online, that's www.mtv.com.pg, and go to our Resource PNG page. Or you can check our page on Facebook. Thanks for your company. Bye for now.